So today we were playing with some dragons, and while this deck did not exactly crush the Pro Tour, there were no copies of this exact deck in top 8. There were 2 copies in top 16, and it basically just dominated Grand Prix Krakow with 5 copies in the top 8, and Alexander Hayne ended up winning. So I think at this point, people are like, all right, this might be the best deck. And if you're one of those people, this video is probably for you, so get ready. But I made some changes that, some people might disagree with, and that's okay. If you want to stick with the CFB list and, just do what they're doing, I can't exactly recommend against that because they've been playing this deck a ton, and they've been doing well at premier level events and stuff, and I've just been over here grinding Moto. So maybe they know some things that I don't, and that's okay. But I think my changes are good. So basically, I have Dragonlord Silumgar over the Drifting Death, and I have an extra Thoughtseize and an extra removal spell. And those changes are not that big. I just respect the beatdown decks a little bit more than the CFB guys do, I think. They're more worried about beating mid-range and control, so they have a Disdainful Stroke main deck. Which is perfectly reasonable. And then, actually, they have the Ugin main instead of the Thoughtseize. So, I don't think that Ugin is good enough against a wide variety of decks to warrant being main decked. But with Oliver winning the Open with Abzan Whip, maybe if that deck picks up in popularity, then Ugin is certainly a good catch-all main deck, but for the most part, I feel like the Dragonlord Silumgar is just a much better version of the Drifting Death. Like the Hexproof is kind of relevant, and the -1/-1 is certainly relevant too, but I think Dragonlord is just a more powerful card. So I've not been disappointed with that. It seems like sometimes you just play like this 3/7 Hexproof against these Siege Rhino decks, and it's like, yeah, you have this blocker that they can't really kill, but overall, it's not really that big of a deal. Whereas Dragonlord just demands an answer, just straight up. And then even if they do kill it, you have things like Haven of the Spirit Dragon to get it back. So I have not ever been disappointed by the fact that my 6-drop dragon does not have Hexproof, but I'm totally willing to believe that, Drifting Death might actually be the better card for this deck. But Dragonlord seems way more powerful, so I'm playing with that one. And the other main thing is I have an extra Invocation instead of a Downfall. Again, I respect the aggro decks a lot, and Downfall is obviously very good, but the issue is it costs double black, which might be kind of strange considering I'm playing 3 Bile Blights. So like if I can't cast Hero's Downfall on time, then like why am I playing so many Bile Blights? And it's not that I can't cast it on time, it's just that if you load your deck up with double black cards, you are running the risk of drawing hands where you actually can't cast these cards, and drawing them in multiples. And those either make you mulligan or make it so you have these, pseudo dead cards until like turn 5 or so until you can find another black source, or, maybe you find a Dismal Backwater or Temple of Deceit and you have to wait a turn for it to actually come online because it enters battlefield tapped. So I think by lowering the amount of double black cards, your draws just kind of smooth out a little bit more, and I like that aspect of it. Plus, the coolest thing about this deck, by far for me, is the fact that things like Outpost Siege, Mastery of the Unseen, various Planeswalkers, things like Nissa, Elspeth, etc., don't really do that much against you because you have these giant dragons. So, obviously Elspeth is good against Dragonlord Ojutai, but for the most part, if someone is like jamming a Xenagos against you and you play like a Dragonlord Silumgar and just take their Xenagos, like they are basically dead because they're already treading water and, trying to nickel and dime you out with these like tiny threats, just like poking you here and there, but like hoping that something like Master of the Unseen or Xenagos is just like this thing that you can't deal with. But when you jam dragons, suddenly you get to turn the corner very, very quickly, and then those cards start to matter much, much less. So since I have the dragons, I feel like I don't need Downfall as much, so I have one less copy of that. And plus, the mono red decks, or red Splashing Antarctica Command, like those decks are very popular and very powerful, especially very popular in Magic Online. So Foul Tongue Invocation is a great answer to those decks. A lot of games against them, you just end up, finding an invocation, using that to gain 4 life to make sure you don't die, and then later in the game, since you have more copies, it is more likely that you find another one with something like Dig Through Time or Dragonlord Ojutai, so then you can actually just put yourself out of burn range. So I think having the 3rd copy of that is pretty important. And that's about it. I don't think you need as many threats. I don't think the Ugin is necessary main deck, so I'd much rather have a 3rd Thoughtseize because it's another cheap way to interact. It's pretty good in the mirror match, obviously. It is a good way to kind of like protect yourself from when you're tapping out. So if you're going to tap out to play Dragonlord Ojutai, obviously you don't want them to just like play Elspeth and immediately kill it. So you get to Thoughtseize them, see what's going on, take the thing that they might be able to use to kill your Ojutai or kill you through an Ojutai that can block. And it also works quite well for Ojutai, like once it's in play. Like if you Thoughtseize them, you get to see what they have and see what they're going to try to use to kill your Ojutai with. And like maybe they only have one thing, you get to Thoughtseize it and then hit them, find another card, and then the game just spirals out of control from there. So I do like Thoughtseize in this deck. I think a 3rd one main deck is certainly possible depending on what you expect to play against. It is castable early, castable late, generally pretty good because the decks in this format are basically a lot of mid-range decks, so even going into like turn 6 or so, they're going to have relevant stuff in their hand. And especially with this deck, you're not making them use their removal spells very early, so those are going to sit in their hand also. So Thoughtseize is almost always going to be live. It's going to have a target. It's another cheap card for Dig Through Time, which is great. And that is about it for the main deck. I don't have the Flooded Strand. I found myself not liking that one too much, which is kind of strange because I've almost always been in the camp of play an extra off-color fetch land when possible when you have Dig Through Time, but the Thoughtseize has helped a decent amount in that regard, and for the most part, I haven't felt super stressed with being able to cast Dig Through Time on the cheap. And the mirror match is pretty weird, and I think the game 1 comes down to decking, at least a lot of the time, so actually fetching lands out of your deck is pretty bad because it can actually just come down to like, you have one more card in your deck than they do, therefore they're going to deck first. So obviously all that changes post board. People get a ton of very impactful spells, so it's very unlikely to come down to decking. But game 1, you both just have all these removal spells. You're just killing each other's dragons, trading 1 for 1, and then it's really difficult to actually get ahead. So other than that, I know some people playing around with having a second copy of Urborg, and that I don't mind. Shout actually had 2 copies of Urborg in his deck with 26 land in his Icefall Regent blue-black deck, and maybe that's something that I should explore a little bit more because with Bioblight and Hero's Downfall, certainly that's something that I would be interested in. And a lot of the games are just like, man, I wish I could draw an Urborg because maybe I have a bunch of Temple Enlightenments instead of Deceits, and maybe you want to cast like a Bioblight and an Ultimate Price on the same turn or something. Or maybe you have a Caves of Koilos that's just digging you a bunch, and Urborg would help a lot. So I could definitely see a second Urborg. But other than that, the sideboard is pretty normal. I have another Invocation, which people normally had, so they go up to 3, I go up to 4. I have 3 Drown in Sorrows, the 4th Bioblight, and a Virulent Plague. Like I said, I respect these red decks. The matchup is very much winnable, but you actually have to put the work in. You have to try and actually beat them, so I am certainly trying to do that. And then Ugin for the matchups like Whip. If Ugin was good enough against more decks, I would be happy playing it main deck, but I do think it is deserving of a sideboard slot, especially because we are not playing a lot of actual white mana symbols. We're casting Ojutai off Haven of the Spirit Dragon a lot of the time, so we only have 6 sources of white outside of that, so we can't play things like Utter End or Erase, really. So Ugin kind of steps up, and he just clears the board of all the random permanents that people are going to try and play against you. And then some people sideboard things like a couple Tassigars, or they have the Dragonlord Silumgars in the board because they have the Drifting Deaths main deck, so they have these additional threats, but I don't feel like I need those too much, so I have a couple extra discard spells. And it's pretty interesting the way the games play out in the Mirror post board, where it's kind of a race to Dragonlord's Prerogative. If you get to cast this, you are generally very far ahead. And then you need some way to actually cement that advantage, or at least make sure that you're just not like discarding the hand size and undoing all the advantage that you gained off of it. So I generally like to sandbag my discard spells up until the point where I can play a prerogative, untap, and then just hit them with a few duresses or thoughtseizes or whatever. And then if they, like, maybe they were missing land drops, so they were discarding the hand size already. So then, their hand is about as good as it can get. They have 7 great spells, and then you take their 2 or maybe 3 best spells, and you still have a full hand of 7. So it's basically the situation I try and set up in the mirror match, and then try and leverage that to victory somehow. Then I have 3 disdainful strokes, which are good against siege rhinos and the mirror match, because it counters basically all of their win conditions, unless they're playing something weird. Counters all their dig through times. I want a bunch of discard spells against prerogatives, so stroke seems better than just having something like negate. I have duress basically for negate, and duress is another card that can come in against mono red, which is pretty important. So overall, I've liked this deck a pretty decent amount, but there's certainly a lot of work to be done here. It's like the Pro Tour happened a week and a half ago at the time when this video goes up, and there was one event where people didn't really test, they just played the same deck from the Pro Tour, it seemed like. So I do think there's a lot of work to be done here, and I'm trying to make that happen, but it's slow goings. But once more people start picking up this deck and talking about it, I'm sure we'll see some good innovations, probably both for the main deck and the sideboard, as far as like what threats you should be playing, how many, is there a good mirror match game 1 plan other than like probably trying to deck them or maybe beat them down if they mold to 5 somehow or something. But yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done, but this is the list I like right now. So we're going to take it through a daily event, see how it goes.